All right, let's talk about AI agents and how you can use them, especially in non-technical roles, to still get work done in the most productive way possible, given their limitations and how they work. In terms of what we're going to cover, I'm going to go through my journey with Gen AI tools like ChatGPT. I'm going to then go into this process, a framework for how to think about creating and using custom AI agents. There's two phases. It's about building your team and then managing your team, and then lessons that I've picked up from using AI agents daily for the last 3 months. When ChatGPT launched in November 2022, I heard about it because I followed tech news and I didn't care. I was very skeptical. I didn't use it really for months. And then in the summer of 2024, I was on parental leave and I decided that I should start learning about this stuff. So I read a bunch of books and then I started playing around with the tools a little bit. That said, I probably spent more time reading the books about Gen AI than I did actually using the tools. The first major moment that changed this for me was around July 2025. I was working on a challenging project at work and I figured out that I could use chatbots like ChatGPT to write Python scripts. And I could then copy those scripts onto my laptop and use them to get things done. For me, that was a game changer because now they were saving me time on this project. And I started to look at ways to use it more and more for primarily Python, but also just writing copy and doing other things at work. Then in February 2026, I installed Kiro CLI on my laptop, and that really kicked things off. That was when it reduced the friction completely, and all of a sudden I had AI doing things for me on my laptop that were genuinely useful every day above and beyond what I had used it for before. So, what does my usage look like? At work, I use Kiro CLI daily. I would say I'm a very active user and I tend to go over my allotted credits for monthly usage every month. And then at home, I use Claude Code and OpenClaw weekly. Definitely most of my time and experience is spent working with this at work. So I would say I'm most familiar with Kiro CLI at this point. But the concepts are generally shared across all the different harnesses or tools. So once you learn one really well, it's pretty easy to apply what you've learned in other using other tools. Why? So why am I using Kiro CLI every day and why do I love it? Why am I such a convert at this point? It's because I can get better quality output and work that is saving me time. So I'm either doing things faster or doing things better. And here's just an example. So this prompt, can you write 2 push notifications to promote Alexa Emergency Assist to our primary target audience via the Alexa app? This is a very typical use case for me at work. And we have 3 different scenarios for quality. This was all done with Kiro CLI. One is using an older model. So this was Sonnet 4.0 with no context. That prompt gave me this copy, which is more like prose. It's not actually push notifications. It doesn't work. I wouldn't be able to use this I'd have to massage this quite a bit to be able to actually ship it as a push notification for our customers. By just moving to a newer frontier model, so this was Opus 4.6, using that same prompt, I all of a sudden got output that was actually formatted like a push notification. It had a title, it had the copy under it. It started to speak about the product I support a little bit more intelligently. And there were still some issues. For example, in the second push notification, the title exceeds the character limit that we have. So it would have truncated. So I would have had to modify this some more. Now, in the third case, using that same model, Opus 4.6, with additional context via a knowledge base about Alexa Emergency Assist, a product I work on, I was able to get copy that fits the character limits for push notifications, that uses some of the positioning and value props that we focus on. And it's not perfect. I'm still likely to massage this, but it's close to being shippable. And this is fast. Like I'm able to do this without having to repeat context or like keep sharing the same information over and over in a chat bot. And that gets to the benefits of AI agents. I think the core benefits are model selection. So generally, they give you a way to change what model you're using for the task at hand. You can select a faster model, or you can select a model that's going to think more and just be more robust in its capabilities. 2, a knowledge base. They all have some way to read local files or information in order to gain additional context. And that's really important because otherwise you're using a general model that knows nothing about your role, about your task at home, your responsibilities, and therefore can't really adapt to the work and the requirements you have for it. 3, on-device access. By running this on my laptop, it reduces a lot of the friction of copying and pasting stuff between like the browser and a file, creating files, doing all this manual tedious work that slows things down. It's able to just do stuff for me. So it can create Excel files, it can read files that I have, it creates things for me, and it's working in the same space where I work all the time. Agency, it can actually do stuff. I guess that point of like, it can write scripts, it can do almost anything you can do on your laptop, and a lot of things that you probably can't do faster and generally better, especially if you're not as familiar with some of the things like command line tools. And then lastly is the memory component. You're able to give it information. It's able to save information that it then takes into every future session, making it better and better as you use it more and more. With AI agents, you're generally going to be able to do some things faster, some things better, and some things that you probably couldn't do at all. And the trick is that you have to start using them daily to understand what are those things and what are the limitations. But to get the most out of agentic AI or AI agents, you need to change how you think about it. You're not just using a tool. In my experience, it's more like managing a team. So it's not about using the default for everything or prompt engineering and thinking about like, how do I write the perfect prompt to get the right output, or starting from scratch. It's thinking about what are the roles that I need? What are the agents and the things that they need to know to do the work that I want them to do? How do I want to work together with them? How do I develop and grow my team? How do I build the systems to make this team as effective as possible? And that gets to this framework, my managed AI framework, that is, again, 2 phases. It's thinking about building your team. So what are the custom agents that you need? Most of these tools like Codex or Claude Code are focused on developers. So they ship with custom agents out of the box that are defined and prioritized for developer workflows. You're going to have to do more work to build agents that can support you in roles that are outside of engineering or code development. So it's building your team and then managing your team. You're going to spend the most time managing your team, which is working with them, spotting where they're deficient, where they're not doing the things that you want, and then improving them so that week over week, the output you're getting and your team are just getting better and better. So let's go into the first phase. Let's talk about building your team. And there's 3 steps here. You're going to define the roles, create personas for those roles, and then set up the agents in your tool of choice. In terms of defining the roles, I did this by hand at first with paper and pencil, and it's a pretty easy process. You don't need to be sitting in front of a computer to do this. You want to think about at work or at home, what are the tasks and things you do on a computer most often? And group the tasks that are similar in terms of how you have to think, the information you need to know, kind of your mindset when you approach that task. An example of this is when I'm doing data analysis, I'm using a very different mindset than when I'm thinking about overall marketing strategy. For data analysis, I'm focused on minutia, the details. I want to know everything about like how metrics are defined. If I see a metric jump up and down or down in terms of value, I want to dig into that and understand what's happening. When I'm working on strategy, I'm thinking more in terms of frameworks and big picture and how do the things work together. So it's a different altitude and a different approach. So you want to take the things that you do, just list them out. You can write or in an Excel file or whatever, put all of the tasks that you do, group them together, however makes sense, And those are going to be the candidates for custom AI agents. You can see the team that I've currently landed on after a few iterations for at work in Kiro CLI. I have 5 custom agents, one that I use when I'm working on campaign strategy, one that I use for writing internal and external copy, particularly internal documents at work and a lot of marketing copy, one that I use for doing any sort of data analysis, experimentation work, or anything that's more numbers oriented, a chief of staff that I use to help me manage my workload and do things like creating to-dos, triaging emails, and just generally trying to work more efficiently every day. And then lastly, my LLM expert, which is who I go to when I just have questions about how can I better use these tools, what's going on, what's the latest research say about how to get the best possible output from an LLM. Creating the personas. Personas are about how you want the agent to work given their role. Back when I first learned about these in 2024, the best practice was to define what expertise you wanted the LLM to have. So you would write things like, you are an expert at A/B testing. You're an expert at Bayesian experimentation or frequentist or whatever it might be. With the current level of models, you no longer need to do that. You don't get a good benefit from it, and it's a waste of tokens. So you want to focus more on the behaviors, how they should act in certain situations or for when they're performing certain tasks. So I would say going back to your set of group tasks, take the one that you're most comfortable with, like whatever the thing is that you lean into naturally and find as easiest for you, and start with that one. Then use the best performing LLM you can to create this initial persona prompt. This can be a chatbot. You can do this in Claude, you can do this in ChatGPT, or if you've already installed something like Claude Code, you can do it there. Switch to the best possible model and just ask it to help you create a prompt for a custom agent. And then review it. You can describe what you want it to do, see what it gives you, review it. Like if you see anything that's really off, go ahead and make some quick tweaks, like work with your agent to refine it, and then just ship it. Don't spend a lot of time here. It doesn't need to be perfect. The great thing is these tools make it really easy to iterate and refine over time. So you don't want to spend hours trying to perfect something before you've used it. On the right, you can see a portion of the persona prompt for my chief of staff that I use at work. And it's a brief line describing what it's doing. And then the rest of the content is focused on how I want it to behave. Then you're going to set up the agents. This is going to vary across tools, but generally speaking, there's 4 components that you can set up. The role, what you want them to do, the rules, how you want them to behave, context, what information you want them to have, and then additional tools. You can get started with just for a custom agent, the role and the rules, like the behaviors you want and the thing you want them to do. That's the persona prompt. Just use the agent. So start your custom agent, your default agent in Claude Code, in Kiro, wherever it might be. And again, I would recommend moving to the best frontier model you can for this, and just ask it to help you set up a custom agent using this prompt, and then provide it the prompt that you have for that agent. It will be able to go in, figure out how the tool works or read its own instruction manual and set things up for you. This is going to be a pattern that I repeat it's a pattern I repeat all the time, and it's one that you want to get comfortable with as quickly as possible to get the most out of this. And that is delegate as much as possible to the agents. Let them do all the work for you. And why should you do this? Like, why go to the trouble of creating custom agents when you can just spin up the default Claude Code agent, Codex agent, and work with it? Well, when you spin up a new session with one of these tools, you are getting a template, a default agent that starts every session frozen in a moment in time where it knows nothing about you and was optimized probably for development flows and not the type of work that you're doing. So it doesn't know who you are, what you do at work, what your family looks like, what you need it to do for you at home. It always starts in the same state. It's like the movie Groundhog Day, but with Bill Murray starting every day not remembering anything that happened in the prior day. In order to go from that default agent state to the custom agent that you want, it has to read the information you provide. So the session starts every time you spin up one of these tools, you're starting this default agent that's a blank slate to some extent, and then it reads all the information, the persona prompt. If you've done system prompts or steering rules, it reads all of that to then go from being the default to being your data wizard, your writer, your design expert, your chief of staff, whatever you need it to be. And that ends up using the limited mental energy that the agent has for doing work. So that's actually called the context window. And it's the concept, the thing that I think is easiest to like rationalize it as is, imagine if you pulled an all-nighter working on a project. In the beginning, you're fresh, you're tackling work, you're very alert, you're putting out good stuff. As the night progresses, as you start to hit the morning, you're probably a little bit more mentally foggy, you're forgetting stuff, you're making mistakes. The context window is like the amount of energy your agent has to do something. And everything it reads, everything it does, everything that happens in a session uses that context window. So if you have one agent that you've given a bunch of information of like, here's how you act to be a wizard, here's how you act a data wizard, a writer, a chief of staff, whatever roles you need, you are using up that limited mental energy before you've started doing any sort of work. And it's more likely that you're going to end up in a situation where the agent's forgetting things, where it's making more mistakes. So it's better to separate things out and create custom agents that are tailored to the role with the tools that they need, the information they need. And that way you have more of that context window, the mental energy available to actually do the task and to get good quality work. And it doesn't matter if you have a model that has a 1 million token context. That's some of the most recent models just default to that. The actual usable amount of that space before you start to have quality issues, it's much lower than 1 million tokens. So context window, it's a very important concept. Context engineering is thinking about how to provide the right information to this agent for the task at hand and nothing else, because it's going to use up its limited mental energy. Tools, as I mentioned, they've converged on very similar patterns, mechanisms, and commands. So generally speaking, in one of these coding harnesses, you're going to find a command /context that you can use to check what's taking up your agent's mental energy. So what's using your context window. Agent files in Kiro CLI refer to things that are preloaded for every session. And in this case, that's going to be your persona prompt and your steering files. In Claude Code, you have the system prompt, and there you're getting persona prompt and Claude MD files. So /context is a way to see how much of my mental energy is left and what is currently taking things up. A great tip is start your session, and before you do anything, just run /context and see what's taking space up. You might find opportunities to optimize, refactor, and reduce so that you have more of that mental energy for the work you actually want to get done. So you've built your team, you now have agents defined and created in your tool of choice. Now you can start managing your team, and that is working with them, spotting gaps and improving them, giving them feedback, giving them guidance, collaborating so that they get better and you get better results. The first step is working with your team. This is easy. Just use your agents for the things that you actually need to get done. Whether it's at home, it could be a task like finances, could be I use it to help me plan out my personal training like schedule, my workout routines. It could be at work working on a paper, a report, a document. So use the agents for the work you have at hand and pick the right agent for the task. Don't just choose anyone. If you're doing data analysis, use your analyst. If you're writing copy, use your copywriter. If you're doing design, use a design-centered agent. And then collaborate to get the work done. This isn't, unfortunately, for non-developers. These tools aren't at a point where you can just ask it to do something and it's going to give you exactly what the output is you need and you can just ship it. It is a engaged, interactive, collaborative process where you remain in the loop. And it's pretty similar to how I work with my manager at work. They will ask me to write a document or do something. I'll create a draft and then I share it with them, get their feedback, and then I iterate and refine. As you're working with your agents, just note where they fall short. Like, where are the things where you're like, this isn't as good as I wish it could be, and keep those in your mind or keep them documented somewhere, because we're going to tackle those and fix them. So there's no training. Once your agents are created, just start using them day to day. Like, see, hey, can you help me on this? So what does this look like in practice? What does it mean to actually work with your agents? What it tends to look like is you're breaking your work down, or the thing you need to get done, into separate tasks that you can collaborate with your agents on. An example here is, at work, I have to write monthly reports to describe how things are going for products I support. If I think about the process of writing a monthly report, it has discrete steps to it. I have to gather the latest data for the period of time that I'm covering. I have to analyze that data, generally looking at, like, how did things change this month versus last month? I then have to interpret the results. What does it mean? Are there insights or things that I want to surface from what I'm seeing in the analysis? And then how do I communicate that out to stakeholders, which is writing the report? I will take each of those steps and use separate sessions to do that work. And that goes back to that idea of the mental energy the agents have. So I'll have a session to gather the data. I'll have a separate session to do analysis, a separate session to interpret results, and I will pick the agent that makes the most sense. So for the data work and the number crunching, I'm using my data wizard. For interpreting the results, I'm working with my strategist. And for writing the report, I'm working with my writer. And then it's that collaborative process of asking it to do something, reviewing what it proposes or its output and what it's done, and then refining, seeing where it can be improved, and then guiding it and asking it again to make those improvements. And then you go through that process over and over again until you feel like you have output that's good enough to move to the next step. So why do this? Why not just have one session where you plow through the entire project? You gather the data, you analyze it, you do the insights, you reason over it, and then you write the report. It goes back to this idea that agents have limited mental energy, and it's a core weakness to how LLMs work. And it goes back to this idea of attention and tokens. But most recently, Microsoft Research put out a study in April 2026 that talks about this, of as the number of interactions with an agent increases on a document, and this is across 52 different tasks, the quality you get gets worse. The document gets worse, errors get introduced, mistakes, things get removed. And this is the case across even the most recent frontier models. So they got up to Opus 4.6, GPT 5.4. In general, newer models are better at this, but it still degrades. The quality still worsens. After just a few interactions, you're down, or 20 interactions. And this worsening of quality, it's based on a couple of things. One, how long is the session? How many interactions are there? And what was the initial file size? And again, this goes back to the context situation of the mental energy, everything they need to work on. If you give them a document, it's a very long document, they need to read the entire thing, and that's using up that context window. And then if you're making changes to it, they are reading your prompts, they're making changes, they're rereading the file and adding things and making changes. All of this is taking up that mental energy. And it also goes back to the point of you have to collaborate. That means you have to stay in the loop and look at what output they're putting out there and making sure there aren't mistakes, making sure it meets the bar, especially when you are working on a longer session, something that's going to take more iterations to get right. So you want to be very mindful of your context window usage, that mental energy. In Kiro CLI, the default in the status line is that it'll show how much context you've used. For Claude Code, it doesn't show it by default, but you can ask it to show it for you. So if you're working with a tool where you don't see some sort of percentage as you're working with it, just ask the agent, say like, is there a way that I can view my context window usage? And this is something I didn't realize context rot was a problem when I was using chatbots, because those tools tend to be consumer oriented and they don't surface that information. So I would use a session, a chat, I would save it and use it for like a week and feed it a bunch of information. And little did I know what I was doing or what was happening or the unfortunate impact of doing that. And the moment I moved to Kiro and Claude, I was seeing that they were surfacing that. And I think that if the tool you're using doesn't surface that and give you a way to manage your context, then it's not going to allow you to get the best possible output and quality from your agents. And it's kind of a sign of, is the tool geared more towards almost recreational use, like a consumer asking a few questions, or is it more something that's going to help you get serious work done? I use models that have a 1 million token context, like they have a large context window, but the research I've seen is that the quality starts to degrade fairly quickly. So I rarely go over 20% of my window usage for any session. If you find yourself going up in usage and you're not done with the task at hand, you have a few options. One, you can just start a completely new session. So every time you open a tab to start a new chat with an agent, it has its own context window and they're completely isolated. So the agent in one session knows nothing about what's going on in the other session. So there's no information shared by default. And they each have their own amount of mental energy. So you can just start a new session, or you can run /clear. And again, this command tends to be common, at least it's there for Kiro and Claude Code. And what clear does is it causes the agent to completely forget everything you worked on. So it's like starting a new session. And you will want to do that if you want to continue working with the agent on another task and you've wrapped up the current task where you don't need it to know anything about what you were working on. Once you run /clear, if you ask in that same session, what did we work on? The agent won't know. Your other option is to run /compact. This is more like preserving a summary of everything you did and throwing away the full details. It's like getting a meeting summary versus actually being in the meeting and listening to the full conversation. So use /compact when you're not done with the task, but you want to reclaim some of that mental energy while preserving the context, while ensuring that the agent continues to know what you're working on, what's happened, just not at the same level of detail as it would have before you ran /compact. This is, in general, a concept called context engineering. Anthropic has a great blog post on this. I'm sure you can find a lot of other things. And again, the overall idea is because of the way LLMs work, the more information you get them, the more it takes to keep track of all of that information and all of the different relationships across different words or tokens. You have this issue where you want to give the agent the specific information they need to get the task done and nothing more. Otherwise, it would be like if you were asked to tackle a quick task at work, but before you did it, they asked you to read Infinite Jest or an encyclopedia book. Right? Hey, write this email, but first go read this 1,000-page book that's completely unrelated. By the time you finish the book, you're going to be tired. You're going to be unfocused, and you're going to have to sit down, and it's probably going to be much more of a struggle to write that email. So context engineering, as of right now, very important. So you're working with your team. You're taking tasks, you're dividing them up, you're having sessions where you're engaging, you're collaborating. What you want to do in that work is look for the places where they fall short, spot the gaps. And I think there are generally 3 types of gaps. There are behavior gaps where the agent isn't acting the way that you want. You'd expected something different. It's, oh, why'd you do that? That's not how I would have done it. Or that's a mistake. That's not how we do things at my company. Then there are capability gaps. That's where the agent just can't do something that you want it to do. And commonly, this is working with some of the tools that you're using, like other apps. And it might include seeing your email, converting files to different types, working with videos. So capability gaps are where it can't do. So behavior gaps are you're not acting the way I expect you to act or want you to act. Capability gaps are you can't do what I want you to do. And then there are knowledge gaps where you just don't have the information you need for the task at hand. An example of a knowledge gap would be you ask your agent at home to help you plan out a workout program for your home gym, but your agent doesn't know what type of equipment you have in your home gym. And so if the agent doesn't know if you have a squat rack, if you have a barbell, if you have a jump rope, then how is it going to be able to create a workout program for you that makes sense? So knowledge gaps are where they don't have the information they need. And again, thinking about this for you or for a team at work, it's the same thing of when you come into a new role, you bring all the experience you had from your prior companies or your prior roles from working in the field that you're in. But you know nothing about how your current company works or operates, their processes, their mechanisms, how they get the work done. You're learning about the product you're going to support. You may not have a lot of experience with it. You're learning about the audience that you're going after. So there's a lot of context that you need on top of all the experience you bring to be successful in a role. And it's the same thing for agents. They come pre-trained, general, a lot of knowledge and capability, but they don't have the details that are relevant to your home life and your work life that they need to do high quality work for you. Once you spot the gaps, you want to then apply fixes at the right level. And there are generally 5 things you can do. There are system prompts, and these are rules that are preloaded in every session that apply to every agent. Kiro has steering files, Claude has Claude.md files, Codex has agents.md files. So for anything where it's, I need to do a fix that applies to every agent, look for the system prompt and where you can add that. A good example of this is it's well known that one of the weaknesses of agents is they do everything they can to make you happy. So if you give them a stupid idea, they are likely to say, like, that's a great idea. You're a genius. Let's go do that. And what you want is an agent that's going to actually push back and point out weaknesses or flaws in your thinking and help you improve that. So that's the type of rule or behavior guidance that likely you want to apply to every agent. Similarly, you don't want them to make up numbers. So that's another good case for a system prompt. Then there's the persona prompt. These are rules that are scoped to one agent. Different tools do it differently. In Kiro, you're able to point to a file that has an additional prompt for your custom agent. In Claude Code, you do it as part of the agent definition. It has just the prompt that you want baked into it along with the tools that it's going to use. But persona prompts is rules that impact how one agent behaves. That's where you want to think about putting those. An example of that is at work, I want my data wizard to be a good user of our databases and our compute. So I have given it rules about how it should query new data sets, explore the data, and initially start working so that I'm not using up a ton of compute in a bad way. Or for my writer, I have a lot of rules about how I want it to write, thinking about lead with benefits. Don't just talk about features. Those are rules that apply to specific agents that other agents don't need to know about. And going back to the mental energy, I don't want them to read a manual that includes a whole bunch of stuff that's not applicable to them at the start of every working session. Then you have skills. Again, there's a common concept that tends to be shared across tools. Skills are like instructions for how to complete a specific task. It may sound really complicated when you hear like, oh, build a skill, do a skill. But if you open them up, they're just plain English instructions. And generally it's like, when you're creating this, when you're doing this type of task, start by doing this, then do this, then do this. And like everything else, your agent can help you build skills. So it's not something you have to do manually, but you just want to think of skills as standard operating procedures. So when there's a flaw in how a certain task gets performed, think about how to turn that into a skill so that you start to get consistent quality across that task when you do it over and over again. An example of a skill I have at work is something my chief of staff does for me called Plan My Day. and I run it every morning. I say, plan my day. And I have worked with the agent to create a step-by-step process where it looks at my to-dos, it looks at my calendar of meetings, it looks at projects, what I'm actively working on, and it is able to help me time block my day for a few priorities. So it's interactive, and we talk about what do I want to focus on that day? What meetings am I actually going to attend? What is important? What's outstanding? And then it just creates blocks in my Outlook calendar to work on different things. And I've always known time blocking is a good way to be more productive and focused, but I've never been able to do it consistently because it just takes too much time until I started using an agent to do it for me. And now every day is time blocked, and it's definitely a time saver. Next, you can just give it a new tool. So going back to a capability gap where it can't do something, you're going to give it a tool to allow it to do that. And there are a couple of tool types that we'll talk about that generally fall into this category. Lastly, for knowledge gaps, you want to give it context files. You want to give it information. And this is something that you use to teach an agent or every agent about a new topic. This Kiro CLI has a really great feature called a knowledge base, which is RAG based, where it basically doesn't preload all the information and allows the agent to search for stuff that's relevant based on the conversation you're having and the work you're doing. And it's almost like the internal wiki for the agent, the place where it can go to say, oh, I'm working on this product. Let me go learn about this product. What are its features? What's its positioning? Who's the target audience for it? How much does it cost? So giving an agent a new context file will help address the knowledge gap. A really basic context file, by the way, you can have for all your agents. It's just who are you? It's your name, it's your role, it's where you work, the products you support. And like everything else, your agent can help you create these in a way that's optimized for how LLMs work. And the great thing about this versus chatbots is every time you apply a fix, it makes every future session better. So those benefits are compounding as you work with them week over week. So whereas initially, for example, my agents would give me incorrect character counts. So when I'm writing marketing copy, I often have character limits of the title needs to be no more than 30 characters. The body needs to be no more than 75. For a long time, I would ask agents to write copy for me. I'd give them those character limits, and then they would give me character counts that were wrong. And it would make me upset because I was like, I need to check everything. And I finally just asked my LLM expert agent, why do you keep giving me character counts that are wrong? And it told me, because we don't count characters. We guesstimate how long this is. And I was like, that's not the right approach. So initially I tried to fix it by having it count characters. So I gave it a steering rule that said, when you're writing marketing copy and there are character limits, count every character. But I found that was still off by a few characters every time. So I had to apply another fix. I had to iterate on it and eventually say, when you're counting characters, do it using command line tools. Do it programmatically versus you trying to do it yourself. And that fixed it. So now for every future session, when we're working on marketing copy, I don't have to worry about, are these character counts going to go over my limit? And is this accurate? I can trust the output. So this compounds over time. You're going to work with your agents on tasks. You're going to spot gaps, and then you're going to apply fixes at the right level so that your team gets better and better over time. So let's go into a few of these skills and tools. I talked about them a little bit. In terms of skills, again, you might be intimidated, like, oh, how do I build a skill? And I remember that's how I felt when I heard about skills. And then I finally opened up a file for a skill and I was like, oh, this is just plain English. It's just someone wrote, do this, do that. Claude, I just recently looked at, Claude Code has a front-end designs plugin that apparently causes it to create better design front ends when it's doing programming or coding for developers. And I was like, what's in this plugin? Is it giving it like some Python stuff or something cool? And I opened up the plugin, or rather I asked Claude, like, hey, what's in this plugin? Like, what's the contents? And again, it was just plain English. It was just additional prompting that was like, when you're doing a front-end design, be very opinionated. Like pick something like stark minimalism or this or that and do these things. So this plugin that leads to much better results, apparently, I thought it was going to be something crazy that I wouldn't understand. And then I read it and it was just instructions of, if you're working on front-end UI designs, do it this way. So for a skill, generally what you can do is just ask an agent to create one for you. Like describe what it is that you want the agent to do, what the steps are that it should follow. A good tip is ask your agent to interview you for whatever information it needs to get before it actually does it. And it can go through and ask you questions to help clarify. And then afterwards, another great way to do it is do some process manually with your agent. So work with it collaboratively to do something like a data analysis or working on a new campaign. And then once you're done, before you end the session, while the context is all still there, say, help me turn this into a skill. And skills are best for repeatable tasks. It's for things that you know you're doing frequently, where it's worthwhile to take the time and actually define a process for how to do it well. And then to use those skills, it differs by tool. Again, they're converging. Like Kiro used to be entirely based on natural language, where you would just say something like, we're going to work on an email. And then if there were an email writing skill, it would look for it and use that email writing skill. But now they've converged and they also expose skills using slash commands, which is how Claude Code works. So check for the tool, but generally speaking, once you create a skill, either the agent will find skills and use them when they're appropriate, or you can manually trigger the skill through something like a slash command, where it might be something like slash write dash email. And just be mindful of, I have seen that agents don't always find the right skill or the available skills. So when you're thinking about designing skills, you also want to watch out for creating skills that are really similar and it's kind of vague about when to use one or the other. And I recently had an issue with this at work where I had two skills for my data wizard to help process, ingest data, analyze it, and have it set up for future work for my products. So I had one skill that was to do it based on like a folder where I would drop files into this inbox folder and then it would process them from there. Then I had a second, and that one was called update data, update product data. I had a second skill called refresh product data, which would go out to databases that I had access to and query to get the latest data. So they were two skills. One was to update product data by looking for files that I would manually drop in a folder. The other one was to update product data by going out to databases I had access to and pulling that data via queries. That one was called refresh product data. I was getting confused about when to use one, and so were my agents. Like if I couldn't remember, and so I recently had to combine those skills into one. I worked with my agent to just say, from now on, if I say refresh product data, I want you to just check, are there files in the folder? And if so, process those. And then I want you to pull the latest data from the databases. And that way, I no longer had to think about what's the right skill to use. Same thing for agents. Be mindful of trying to not create skills that are too ambiguous about when should I do this versus when should I do that. But skills, great concept, great thing to do. And then you have tools. Tools, generally, from what I've seen, there are two types of tools you're going to rely on. There are MCPs, and those are like apps that allow your agents to use other apps. So when you want to connect to your Gmail, to your Outlook, to Slack, to OmniFocus, you're going to use an MCP. There are a ton of MCPs out there, and in some cases, you can just create an MCP yourself. At work, I use OmniFocus for my to-dos and task management, and there wasn't an internally available MCP. So I just asked my agent, can you write an MCP to control my app, my OmniFocus app? And it went through, did discovery, and figured out a way to write an MCP that I now use every day. And as far as I know, it only works on my laptop. So it's not something that I could share out broadly, but know that that's an option. Is just check with your agent. If you can't find an MCP for something, just ask it, are you able to write an MCP to control this? And it may be able to do that for you. Be careful about what you install though, because there might be malware. So try to only install reputable MCPs, things that are very popular or that come directly from the company that you're using a tool for. The reason for that is there's this deadly trifecta with agents where if you have an agent that has internet access, that has access to your information, and that is running code that you did not write, in this case MCPs, that ends up being vectors for it to share confidential or personal information out with someone that you don't know. An example of this, of what this might look like, is say that at home. So at home, I do have an agent that I use for financial stuff, for helping me manage our budget, our finances, and it has access. It knows all the accounts I have, how much money is in those accounts, what the account numbers are. It doesn't know passwords to get in, but it's all sensitive information that I don't necessarily want anyone to have. If my agent that I use for finances, I connected some MCP to it that I found on the internet, that MCP might have hidden information in there that says, whenever this is activated, I want you to send everything to this website that's sitting there and just like catching that information. So my agent could share all my accounts, how much money we have, like our finances, out with someone else that, I don't know what they would do malicious with that information, but it can get worse. So generally, the thing is you just want to be careful about what you install and use. So you have MCPs, and then the other tool is command line tools. So open source, there's a lot of amazing tools. I feel like agents will probably make open source even more popular for folks that don't use it. Some common examples are like Python. Python is a general toolbox filled with so much amazing stuff, and it's used in a lot of different areas for things like natural language processing, for data analysis. It can expose additional functionality on your laptop. So Python is a general amazing tool that your agents can use. And then Pandoc, which is one I use at work a lot. So agents write in Markdown by default. It's a very lightweight format, but it's not great for collaboration or that easy to read and digest. So Pandoc allows you to convert Markdown to Word, Word to Markdown across a lot of different formats. So I installed Pandoc, and now at work, I'll work with my agents on documents in Markdown. And then when I'm ready to share it out with stakeholders, I'm able to use a skill that converts it to Word using a template and design formatting that's appropriate for my company and our internal guidelines. So for skills, you're just writing instructions out for how to do a process that you want to do over and over again. Use the agent to do that for you. For tools, you're generally going to be connecting MCPs or downloading additional tools that are open source command line tools that it can use. Things like Python, like Pandoc, like FFmpeg for working with videos, UV for running Python more effectively or efficiently. There's a lot of stuff out there that you can find that are generally just amazing tools. As I mentioned, I have now been working with agents daily. It's at a point where I can't imagine going back to doing work without having an agent always open and available to help me take care of whether it's things I don't like to do or just to run ideas, to collaborate on, to write, to do whatever it might be. So first, the realities. Hopefully I've made it clear it's an ongoing practice. So it's something you have to actively manage. It's like managing a team. You don't just set it up and then you're done. You're constantly having to look for where are the issues where they're falling short, what's the information they need, the tools that they need, how can I make this better? And you don't have to do that, but to get the best possible output given current limitations, that is important. It is about context engineering, defining custom agents. So it takes work, but the benefits you get are worth it. Second, agents still hallucinate. So even though you can apply fixes, you have to be careful. Just the way LLMs work, you're not always going to get the same behavior. And then as you're working in a session, the longer it gets, the more that they forget the first stuff that they read, which tends to be all the rules and behavioral stuff you gave them. So they're going to make mistakes. So don't, if you're lucky, you apply a fix and you never have to worry about a problem again. But don't be surprised if you find yourself having to go back and tweak it and try to address edge cases. An example of this is I have a rule, a steering file that tells my agents to delegate work out to other custom agents based on the work. So if I'm working with my writer on a document and I want to revisit a piece of analysis, I want that agent to go contact my data wizard and use that one to do the analysis and the numbers work, because the data wizard has rules, prompting, information that's unique to that type of use case. Similarly, if I'm working with the data wizard on an analysis and then I want to write a report to share it out with my teammates, I don't want it to write that copy. I want it to delegate out to my copywriter to do the writing. And generally speaking, it works pretty well, but my strategist pisses me off, will insist on writing the copy for everything, internal and external, even though the rule is that it should be delegating. So I keep trying to tighten the verbiage of that steering rule, that system prompt, to ensure that the strategist actually delegates work out to the writer and to the data wizard. And so that's a active situation that I'm still trying to address. So the point is, yes, you can apply fixes and you can get better output, but there are just shortcomings that are so baked into how LLMs work that you might find yourself still running into these problems. Third, keep your team small. It does take work. It does add complexity. The more skills you have, the more agents you have, the more complex your setup gets, just the harder it is to remember how to use it. There's a concept called span of control that is about how many people should a manager manage and what's the ideal number. So there's research that shows it tends to be around 8 or 9 folks on a team for the manager to be able to manage them effectively. And I think it's the same for agents. Like, keep your team small. You're building a team, not a department, because you don't want like 100 agents where you're then trying to think, for this task, who is it I'm supposed to work with? What's it supposed to go to? And I think this will get more efficient over time so that you are able to have more specialized agents. But for now, I would say fewer is better. And in fact, start with one. Like, the easiest thing is start with one agent, and only as you find scenarios, or if you did the actual task of dividing your work into different groups of like similar tasks, start with one, or start with what you need for like the task at hand, the work. Don't build agents that you don't need. And then lastly, you're the decision maker. You're not going to automatically get high quality work. For non-developer tasks, it's really difficult to write automated tests. And I've tried. It's, how do you write a test to determine if an email is good and ready to send, or if a marketing a campaign looks good, or the copy is ready and it's effective, or a document's expressing things exactly how you want it to express. So you're not going to automatically get shippable work. And this depends on the level of quality and how important the task is. But generally speaking, you're going to be collaborating. You're going to be the human in the loop, where you're going to stay in there and you're going to ask your agents to do something. You're going to review it and you're going to be like, this isn't quite where I want it. Like, make these changes or adjust how you think about it. So even, for example, for this presentation, I used agents. Like, I had my team working of, what sort of outline do you think I should do? What are the points I should make? But I still spent hours on it. So I built the slides myself because I didn't like what the agents were building. I used it to help me refine language, to simplify, to even think about some of the visual design to try to make it look nicer than what I would have done myself. But it still took time. So if you think that you're going to use one of these tools and all of a sudden you're just going to like prompt and you're going to get a document that's ready to share with your managers or leaders, that's not it. Like, you're going to be collaborating. It's like you have a teammate working on your laptop and you all are tackling the same problem together. You're in a room, you're on the laptop, and you're like, okay, how do we say this? How do we do this analysis? How do we write this? So just be ready to actively collaborate and engage with the agents to actually get high quality work. I've made this point a few times. I'm just going to make it again. Delegate as much as possible to your agents. 99% of my setup at home and at work was done by agents. So I described what I wanted and then it did it for me. I don't have time to manually write out a persona prompt. Frontier models probably have people that do, but I have work to get done, and this is a tool that is to help me get my work done at home or at work. So delegate as much as possible. Describe what you want and it can do it. Almost anything. Delegate by default. Assume it can handle the task until proven otherwise. Just say, can you do this? Try to do this. Try to do that. And when it fails or when something doesn't work, that's feedback. If you get an error, take that and give it back to the agent. Say it failed. Here's the error, and let it try again. There are different ways to do this. Or if the document's not quite where it is, highlight the part that's not right and give it back to it and say, like, I don't like the tone here. Change this. There are different ways to do it, but every tool generally has a really cool trick of you can take a screenshot to your clipboard and then copy and paste the image into the chat. So even though it's a command line tool and you're doing it in the terminal, you can share images with it. And this is a really effective way to share context because an image is worth 1,000 words. So when something fails, give that information back to your agent. Tell it what happened and let it try again. And when you do something with the agent manually, if you're really happy with the outcome and it's a repeatable process, it's a thing you need to do over and over again, turn it into a skill. At the end of the process, just say, help me turn what we just did into a skill. And then work with it to create a skill so that in the future, you've preserved that learning. Last thing, as I mentioned, if it fails or if it says it can't do something, just repeat the ask. Don't let it be lazy. This happens all the time when I am working with people at work, helping them set up Kiro or Claude, where we'll say something like, hey, set up the MCP, or can you update my PowerShell profile to do this, or my default shell profile on Mac to do that. And the agent will paste the command and say, like, here's what you run, do this. And it's like, no, you go do it. Like, if you have the resources, the compute to allow you to use agents extensively, like, do it. Now, it's a different case if you're paying for this, it's API based, or if it's just too costly. But especially for the more complicated stuff, just let the agents do it. Don't let them be lazy. This is one that it took me a month to figure out, but because of the way sessions work, because of how you're going to find yourself working with agents, it's really valuable early on to create a skill to save project context across sessions. Claude Code does this automatically with memory, and now it has this dreaming thing where at night it like consolidates memories and makes them more token efficient. But it's still pretty helpful to have a skill that you can run when you're done with a session that is part of a bigger project where your agent saves the context. That way, when you pick up that project again, which could be in a few seconds where you just switch to a different agent, or you just need to restart your session to get back your mental energy. It could be days later, it could be weeks later. When you point your agent at the project you're working on, it can read that file and get back up to speed. This has been incredibly helpful, even for me of I don't remember where I was at on a project. I can talk to my agents, say like, hey, we were working on this. It's been a few weeks since I worked on it. What's next? Like, what is it I'm supposed to be doing for this? And it makes it so you're not having to repeat information. So it's very easy to do. You can ask your agents to do it for you. Help me create a skill so that we save context. And on the right, you just see an example of how this worked for this presentation. Like I worked on it across a lot of different sessions. And I started when I said, we're working on, and then I gave it the folder name of this project, this managed AI framework presentation. And then it went through, found it, and then it read the context.md file. So it read that as like, cool, I see what the purpose of this presentation is. I see how many slides we've done, the outline, and what we're working on. So think about how do you make it as easy as possible to preserve information that will be useful across sessions and across projects. In terms of ongoing improvement, same thing. I've delegated this. I have a process that's based on skills where at the end of a session, I say, let's close shop. And I have a close shop skill that does a few things. It saves project context. It also saves generalizable feedback into a log, a central log file for all of my agents. And then once a week or every other week, I'll work with my LLM expert agent to audit the logs and then help me figure out where we should apply fixes. And this goes back to delegate. This is something where if I had to do it manually, I wouldn't have time, but I would lose out on the opportunity to improve my agents. So on the right, you can see a video of me doing this at home with Claude Code, where we were reviewing and I was like, hey, what are the things that we should consider? And it brought up a very common one. My agents were claiming things it couldn't verify, so it was making stuff up. It suggested 3 improvements, and then I reviewed them and said, go ahead and do it. And it goes through and it updates my claude.md file, my system prompts, with additional guidance to try to avoid that problem in the future. So the overall mechanism here is try to create a skill or think about a process for ongoing feedback and improvement. It's the same as hopefully how your manager works with you, or if you're a manager, how you manage your team of weekly one-on-one sessions where you describe how things are going, or you might give them feedback in the moment so they can improve things going forward. So I have a skill at the end of a session. I ask my agents to log any generalizable feedback or learnings that they think might be worth fixing in the future. And then I review it. I batch it so that I can review it once or a week or every other week. And then have a high bar for what you actually implement. Because again, everything that you give your agent uses up its mental energy in terms of system prompts, steering files, changes. So even skill changes, when it runs the skill, it has to read the skill. So you want to ask yourself, is this something that is actually going to happen on an ongoing basis that's worth attempting to fix? And then when you fix it, you don't need long flowing prose to fix it. Keep it terse, keep it bullet points, keep it as brief as possible without losing substance, because every word has to earn its place because it's using up that mental energy. As I mentioned, Kiro is where I spend the most time and I'm the most advanced. And what does my setup look like after months of daily usage? So I have my Kiro configuration. All the tools generally have a hidden folder. So for Kiro, it's .Kiro. For Claude, it's .Claude. For I actually don't know where OpenAI keeps it, but OpenClaw has its where they keep global settings. So we have steering rules, skills, servers that feed into my agents. And then I like to have a workspace. So I create a folder, and that's where I always launch my agents. These tools are created and optimized for developer workflows. So their general idea is developers tend to have a folder where they have code for different projects. Like every project has its own folder, which is like a repo. And so they will launch it in the folder that has the code that they're working on. I launch everything in the same folder and then have folders for specific projects. I like that. It's easier for me because I don't have to think about where should I go. And again, I'm working quickly across a lot of different things. It means I do lose out on some stuff. So when we talk about system prompts like Claude MD or steering, you have global levels of that, but you can still have project levels, like project-based rules that you are only applied based on what folder you launch in. But long story short, I have 5 agents. I have 50 skills, 9 MCPs that I'm using, 60 context files that are in my knowledge base for the products I'm supporting. I have 85 lines of behavioral rules. So this is my system prompts. They're steering files. Initially, I had a lot more. And then I went through and audited everything and got rid of stuff that wasn't valuable or that was too heavy in prose and made it a lot more token efficient. I stole Heartbeat, which is from OpenClaw, and had Kiro build something for me to do the same thing at work. So I have some automation that runs every hour that helps me triage my emails and look for to-dos and put it all into my to-do app so that I can stay on top of work that comes at me from different places. I am starting to look at eval frameworks, but I'm very early on in this. And that is a lot of after I apply fixes, determining if I'm getting better performance tends to be very vibe based of like, yeah, that seems right. That looks better, but it's not as rigorous as I'd like. So I'm starting to look at how do I do automated testing where I can compare an agent or a skill in its current version against the one with proposed changes to see if it actually leads to better output. And it's definitely challenging for qualitative work, things that again aren't like writing code where you can say, did it do this, yes or no. Very early days for that. And then automated OneDrive backup. So every 30 minutes, my agents, there's a script it created to back up. Because all of this is mainly just text files, saving your agent, saving your setup, your information, it's just about backing up files, text files. So I back them up to OneDrive. You can also do it to GitHub. There's different ways, but anyways, this is where I'm at now after months of usage. And my team has changed a bit. I initially had 2 separate writers, one that was for writing internal documents at work, another one that was for marketing copy. I combined them into one and then opened up a slot so that I could have a chief of staff because I found that I needed that type of role on my team. And that is it. I have written blog posts at oniolo.com, where I go into more detail about the framework and more about how to get this up and running. I hope it's been helpful. This is, I'd say, fundamentals of how to think about AI agents, how to work with them given current limitations. The space is changing rapidly. So the stuff that you need to do now, you may not need to do in 6 months. For example, as every LLM model gets better, so Opus 4.7, Opus 4.8, Opus 5.0, whatever we get, GPT 5.5, they generally get more capable and require less of that harness engineering of like the steering